Jonathan's laughing because he knows I always forget. I always forget, and then I'm already always partly into my story, and then I finally start recording. So, going back, just so I can get this recorded, I'm gonna bullet point what I just talked about. I'm Raul Lopez Jr. I'm the author of 7 books, 7 books. Core book being Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear. Um, Transforming Childhood Trauma with God and Psychology. Uh, Learn the importance of understanding expressing your emotions. So this is my core message. It's what I do. It's where my speaking form came from. Transparency, acceptance, and growth. Tag Talks, where I bring other people to come and share their stories. And it all started with me sharing mine. It all started with me as an adult looking for more in my life, seeking, growing, and finding the answers, right? Seek and you shall find, and finding the answers. And when I was finding these answers, what it did is it took me all the way back to my childhood of understanding some things about my life and why I was in such a darkness, why I lived in such a fog, why my relationships didn't work, whether it be with friends, family, in relationships, whatever the challenges were, even with my older kids. Everything was affected by my traumas. I didn't know it at the time. I was in depression for many, many years. I had no idea what depression even was. I didn't discover what depression was till I was in my mid-20s, right? When I started going to school and learning about psychology and these things. So I realized over the years, like how many people don't like the way they feel and don't know why they feel the way they do. And they don't even realize what it is, you know? And looking back at depression, the reason I even knew, because, you know, there are symptoms of depression, there's symptoms of everything. And one of the things that happened to me for many years was I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I mean, I had a job and I could not get myself out of bed and get to work on time. And whatever it was, a God thing looking back, I just happened to have a boss who was young. And although he didn't like that I was late to work every day, and this is just one example, although he didn't like that I was late to work every day, he never really did anything about it. And I don't know if that was a curse or a blessing, honestly, because if he had like pushed me, maybe I would have came, or maybe not. Who knows, you know? But I do remember just like desperately trying to get myself out of bed, and I just couldn't, and I couldn't figure out why either. And at that time, I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know that I was in this depression. It was a really interesting time of my life. Now, going back, I'm going to bullet point because, like I said, most of you guys know a bit about my story. But you know, growing up, you know, from 0 to 7 years old, basically, I had a wonderful family. I lived with my mother, my father, and I had siblings. My mother had brought 2 children to the family. My father brought one, and then my mother and father together had me. So we were kind of a mix of a family, very close, loving. I was very close with my father. And then one day my mother came home and she says, son, get in the car. We're going to go for a ride. And I grew up in San Jose, California, Northern California. And she put me on a plane and she flew me to Alaska. Uh, it was an interesting time, airplane, a little kid, Alaska, getting these new places. It was excitement. I didn't think anything of it. It was just, I was enjoying the trip until the next day when I asked her, where's my father? And she basically just said, no, you're not going to see your father again. Don't worry about your father. And it shifted me. It completely shifted my life from this loving, young, happy, courageous, just joyous little boy, like all kids are, right? Like all kids need to be, to this loss, confusion, anger, sadness, depression, anxiety, just all of these negative emotions that I didn't understand. I had no idea. Everything I just explained to you and expressed to you right now is because I've learned how to express them. But when you're a kid, you don't know how to say, Mom, I feel sad. Mom, I feel broken. Mom, I feel confused. Mom, I feel lost. Mom, I feel pain. I mean, we don't know these things. No one's ever taught them to us, right? That's why the first version of this book is learn the importance of understanding and expressing your emotions. So not knowing how to express the emotions as I held them in. And I always give the example of emotions are an energy, right? Emotions, energy in motion, emotions. And it's very easy to celebrate for a positive, happy emotion. We raise our hands, we joy, we jump up and down, whatever it is, a football game, watching our kids or whatever's happening, it's very easy to express positive emotion. But negative emotion, for some reason, especially when we don't know what it is, we hold it in and we hold it in and we hold it in, and it's compressed. And as we know, any energy that's compressed at some point will explode, right? So emotionally, um, physically, I became very angry, filled with all of this negative energy. And at a very young age, I started to like fight, enrage. I would fight. I mean, if somebody was looking at me, or I thought somebody was looking at me, I would just fight and have these battles. And that started after that, this being taken from my father, and then going to school every day and crying, going to school every day and crying and crying and crying. And then kids started making fun of me. And I always talk about the day that I made a decision on the playground when I saw these kids laughing at me. And I remember just standing there, like vividly, standing there looking at these kids. And in my mind, in my heart, I said, no one's ever going to laugh at me again, and no one's ever going to cry. I'm never going to cry. No one's going to laugh at me, and I'm never going to cry again. And that's the person that I became. And that was the person that would fight with rage if I thought you were going to laugh at me, if I thought you were looking at me, if I thought you were going to mock me. I would attack you before you got a chance to, not even knowing what was going on, right? I'm sure many of the fights and breakouts and things that I had, that I created, people were just like, what is happening? I didn't even realize, why I was just going so crazy. And I would black out for many years. When I would get into fights, I would black out. And many a times I would wake up over somebody and they'd be laying on the floor. And I knew that I had gotten into a fight, but I don't even remember what had happened. And the reason that happens is just we're in a rage. And I'll tell you, I'm not a big guy, right? I'm 5'6". I'm not a big guy. I'm 5'6". And growing up, I didn't grow until I was 19. So growing up, I was always been a very small guy. But what I've learned is that rage is very powerful. It's also an energy, and this rage comes out, and it's very difficult to calm somebody in a rage. You've probably seen over the years, you see these police videos and things like that, where these people are on some form of a drug, and it literally will take like 5 or 6, 7 cops to try and just hold one person. And it's because they're out of control and they're in these rages, right? And the drugs obviously are affecting it. But I would go into those rages without any type of drug and just overpower everything that I was doing. Anyways, that's what happened, holding in these emotions. That's what happened for me moving forward, just carrying, being filled up with all of this negativity, right? Have you ever seen the easiest examples? Have you ever seen anybody on the road driving and you pass them and they think they cut you off, or you cut them off and they're flipping you off and they're honking, they're screaming and road rage and all of these things? I see these people and I look at them and I feel bad. My heart hurts for people that are in these situations, that are filled with that rage, that are filled with that energy. And that's why I even jump on calls like this every once in a while. It's in my heart that somebody needs to hear this, but what I see in those people that get road rage or get quick to anger, boom, because I was like that, quick to anger, is that they're filled to here with negative. So anytime any little thing happens, they overflow. And when you overflow, that's when you burst out, right? Either that, and in addition to that, is when we're full of this anger all the time, and we become that person, because we can become that person. Doesn't mean we have to be that person all of our lives, knowing the tools, and we can switch our state like that. But for the most part, when we become that person, anytime something small happens, we're triggered and we get angry, and that even becomes a habit. It becomes who we are at that time. And I always like to make it clear, and I'll say it again, it doesn't mean that's who you have to be, right? I was a completely different person, 30 years ago. I mean, I was in prison. I belonged in prison, right? I was a completely different person back then. So I say that I got to finish up the story, right? So at 7 years old, I had these traumas taken from my father. I was lost. I was in this darkness. I had all these dark energies, and I called it living in a fog, and I would fight with rage. So we came back. We did come back from Alaska, and I did get to see my father. But after being taken from him, that's one huge just punch in the gut and the mind, the body, the heart. And then I came back, and I was able to see him, and a little boy, and thinking everything's going to be back to normal. He had dropped off my sister at my grandmother's house, and he moved away. So he came to see me when I came back, and I hugged him and we cried, and it was, this just reunited. And then he said, okay, I'm going to go. Bye. And he left. So not understanding these things at such a young age, what I developed over the years was abandonment, right? Abandonment. First, I was taken from my father, and then I was abandoned by him. And all I ever wanted to do was see him. All I ever wanted to do was see him. And I'll tell you, when I would see him, it wasn't a good thing. I was happy, I was excited because I got to be around him. But my father was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic. He was addicted. He had a really wild and crazy lifestyle that when you're a little boy, you don't know. You just love your daddy, right? You just love your dad. You don't realize that their life, right? My mother knew what was going on, and she left for good reason, but she didn't know how to explain it to the kids or tell the kids why, right? What was going on. She just felt danger for her family and she took off. Okay. So I don't blame my mother. I don't blame anybody for any of the stories that I'm telling you right now. I don't blame anybody. It's life. We do what we know, right? We do what we know. And when we get to that point and we gain the wisdom, we want to help people with it, you know? So, I did see him on and off. Very rarely did I get to see him, but when I did see him, he would treat me badly. And I didn't even know that was happening. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Probably the worst thing, he was always on drugs or drunk or alcohol and all these crazy and wild lifestyle. But what he would do is I'd go visit him. And I do remember my mother, like when she would drop me off, she would yell at him. Like she'd have her finger in his face and she'd be saying, "You better take care of my son. He wanted to see you and you better stay here and you better take care of him." And she would just really go off on him. And, and I used to wonder, just like, why does she do that? You know? Because I didn't want him to not want me to come if she was going to cause these problems, more psychological, just trauma within this little boy. So the example that he used to do to me on a regular basis is he'd say, "Son, you want to go to the park? Son, do you want to go on a ferry ride in San Francisco?" And I'd always say, "Yes, obviously, let's go have some fun." And we'd walk through the park. We'd never stop because he lived on one side of the Panhandle in San Francisco, if you know the area. And we'd walk through the park and there was a bar on the other side. And we'd never play in the park. And he'd walk to and he'd go into the bar and he'd say, "Sit outside right here, son, in San Francisco. Sit outside right here outside the bar. I'll be right out." And he would leave me there sometimes from noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon until the bar closed, right? And I would be sitting out 7, 8, 9 years old outside this bar, people walking up and down the streets in San Francisco, a wild and crazy place. And he would come out sometimes just fighting himself, fighting in rage. He would come out drunk and wasted and not knowing what was going on. He'd forget that I was even sitting there. Just all of these wild things that he would do. And he would do that all the time. Every time I'd go see him, we'd be at a different bar and I'd be sitting outside of it. And I do remember him coming out fighting. That was an impact, a trauma. I remember an old lady one time saw me sitting on the floor outside this bar and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm waiting for my dad." And she said, "Well, where is he?" And I said, "He's inside the bar." And she got really upset that I was sitting, because I didn't think anything of it. I was happy to be around my father. Even though he was inside the side of the wall, I was around my daddy. I was happy to see him. But she went in that bar and she pulled him out and she was screaming and yelling, and you're this little boy sitting on the street in San Francisco and all of these crazy things. And that's when it started to touch, like, oh, is this wrong? Like, should I not be sitting out here in the street? So he would do these things. And I tell you these examples purposely because I'm going to give you how I started to understand and figure out my life and these traumas and how to come past them and come through them and so on and so forth. So he would do things like that on and off. The other thing that he would do is when he would call me, by this time I'm a teenager, when he would call me, he'd always be drunk or just broken in some form, some way himself emotionally, right? And again, I don't blame my father for these things. He had his own problems. He had his own darkness. He had his own drunkenness. He had his own pain. He had his own depression. His father left him when he was a little boy, right? Chains, talk about chains and patterns. So he had his own issues. Looking back, I don't blame it at all. But he would come around and he'd call me sometimes in the middle of the night. I'm a teenager, he'd call me and my mom would answer the phone. Back then there was no cell phones. It would be, a house phone. And she'd wake me up. She'd say, "Your dad's on the phone." And, what? And I'd be excited to talk to him. And, he'd be crying and, "I miss you, son. And I love you, son. And I know I'm such a bad dad." And all of his stuff. And I'd see him. Get some water. No matter what, I would go see him. I wanted to see my father. As time went by, uh, talk about abandonment, talk about rejection and rage and all of these things. There was a time when my father died very young. He was only 47 years old because of his lifestyle. And 4 years before he died, the doctors came to him and they told him, they said, listen, if you don't stop the way you're living, your lifestyle, you don't change things up really quick and start taking care of yourself, you're gonna die. Right? He didn't do anything. He kept living the life he was living. 2 years later, they said, you're gonna die in 2 years. And then he stopped, but it was too late because he had something in his brain and it was already deteriorating, and it was too late. So at that point, he started, cleaning himself up and taking care of himself. But by that point, I was lost myself, and I was broken, and I was living in the darkness, and I was drunk, and I was fighting, and I was doing drugs, and I was living his lifestyle, basically. Right. I started living his lifestyle as a very young man, getting in trouble, going to jail, getting incarcerated. I got taken from my mother, made a ward of the court. Just as, this whole darkness that developed through my traumas. And I remember one day going and knocking on his door, and I had been out most of the night. I got into a fight and I had this big cut on my head and blood and this whole thing. And I knocked on his door and he answered the door. And I said, hey, I need somewhere to take a shower and crash out. And he looked at me and he said, son, I cleaned myself up. I can't have this kind of stuff around me. He said, you got to go. And he shut the door. Talk about abandonment, looking back. I these things touch me. They do touch me now because I'm like experiencing the emotion as I talk about this story, but I don't allow it to affect my life anymore, right? That's the thing, because I do understand what happened. So when I say abandonment, right, that's another form of abandonment. I still didn't know what abandonment was. I still didn't know what depressions and anxieties and all these things that we're going to be talking about were. I just was experiencing them and being punched over and over and over and over again with these things, going back even my earliest girlfriend, the first real girlfriend I had, I found out that she had another boyfriend or something. I'm talking young, 13 years old. And again, I didn't understand what it was, but it was another punch, right? It was like, this whole thing is love equals pain. Love equals pain, right? So my father, my girlfriend at a young age, all these things kept happening. Psychologically, I didn't know what was happening, but I was being molded to anybody that I love or like hurt me. People that I love or like or want around me hurt me. So psychologically, I just put up this huge wall. Like, no one's going to come close to me. I'm not going to love anybody. I'm not going to let anybody like me. I'm not going to let anybody love me. I'm not going to receive. I didn't know that. I was doing that. Self-sabotage, it's called, but I started to do it. So going back just a little bit. So we did come back, like I said, from Alaska. By 9, I was doing drugs, okay? At 13, with that woman, that girl, we were both kids. I had my first child, and then at 14, I got incarcerated. Between the age of 14 and 24, I spent most of that time incarcerated in some type of facility, from juvenile hall and group homes and all this kind of stuff, to county jails, all the way to state prisons. During those times, I always asked the same 3 questions to myself. Why do I do what I do? Did a lot of dumb things, was always getting in trouble, just lost, right? Why do I act the way that I act? I acted like I was this cool guy. The neighborhood I grew up in, I was this in the gang neighborhoods and the whole thing. And I had this reputation for fighting because I was so lost. And I took that respect, right? The altered, skewed respect of being a tough guy and a fighter and all this kind of stuff as a significance in my life, right? That was how I got my source of significance, per se. So I acted a certain way, right? I did a lot of dumb things and I acted a certain way, but it wasn't really who I was. It wasn't really who I was. And the most important was, why do I feel the way that I feel? Why did I feel this way? What is this inside of me that no matter what I'm doing, I'm always just in this fog, broken in this fog? In prison, asking those 3 questions throughout all my life. In prison, a lot of horrible things happen. People die regularly in prison. It's not the news and stuff because it's just part of the lifestyle, I guess you want to call it. But I started to get this calling of, I knew there had to be more. That's what came to me. There has to be more, right? And I'll tell you, when this shift happened, I didn't realize it. Looking back, I know, like I always say, but I had a little green Bible, In prison, they give you these little tiny green Bibles. There's a few different types, but there's this little green Bible, and it's just it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the New Testament. And I would read it every day. And I wasn't a good reader. I'd spent most of the time, like I said, on the streets or in some type of facility. I wasn't a good reader, but I would just read it over and over. I'd go through the whole thing. I'd read it and I'd read it and read it. It'd take me a long time to get through one, but I just read it and read it and read it. And I think just based on that is where some of this enlightenment started to come to me. Not realizing it, but these things, there's more to life than what you're living, right? Visions, right? I had visions. I had a vision when I was in prison. I had visions all the time, never realizing they were God speaking to me. That I just had these visions, and I would be like, "Whoa, that was weird," you know. One of them, while I was in prison, I had many in and out of incarceration, but one of them, there was a time when our group that I hung around with in prison was going to go fight with another group. And I was sitting on the ground, and our guy came and said, "Hey, we're gonna go get down with these other guys, and you have to. That's subculture thing. When the people you hang around, you got to defend. When you're in prison, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no not this time. You have to do what you have to do when you're living that lifestyle." So in this quick vision, when I was standing up off of this table, I was on a table with 4 people. We were playing dominoes on San Quentin prison yard, and as I stood up, I looked over and I saw everybody else standing up that was in my group, and they were just like, "Let's go, let's go." And way on the other side, there was an older man. At this time, I'm in my early 20s, so I don't know that he was probably 65, right? And I'm very close to that now. So back then, he looked like an old guy, but he was weathered, meaning he looked like he'd spent the majority of his time in prison. He wasn't healthy. He had a little bit of hair. He was gray, and he was probably drugs and stuff, because he didn't look like a healthy man. But he was really skinny and frail. He was much older, and he stood up and he was like, "Come on!" Like he was gonna go fight, you know. And I got this vision within half a second of just me standing up and looking over like this, standing up. The first thing was him sitting in a lazy boy chair with kids around him, grandkids around him. And I looked and I saw him sitting in this chair with grandkids, and something said, "That's where he should be. He shouldn't be here. That's where he should be." And then the next second, I was sitting in that chair. And the voice said, "That's where you're going to be. That's going to be your life." And then I stood up, I saw it, and then I went and did what I had to do. It was that quick. These types of things started to speak to me. And I believe 100% that everybody on this call, that everybody that has challenges, good, bad, or ugly, God speaks to you. If you don't know it, start to look at it. Start to pay attention. Something's talking to you. Something's giving you that intuition. Something's showing you those visions. It's not just random, right? So at those times, that for me, it was random. I had no idea what was going on. Anyhow, I got out of prison, and I did go on a journey. And I'm going to cut this down because I want to give some tips and some tools. I got out of prison and I went on a journey, and I forced to go to college. Got my GED and then, or my high school equivalency. I don't know if there's any difference in that. And then went to college, and I discovered Psychology 101. My Psychology 101 professor, she was Dr. Collins. She was Native American, practicing her Native American spirituality her entire life, and she was a psychologist. So she combined the two of spirituality with psychology in this course. So it was a very unique course. The average person doesn't take a psychology course like that. And it really shifted. I needed everything that she taught, because I was lost from the age of 7 years old. I knew nothing. I was hardly in school. I was on the streets. I was incarcerated. I knew nothing about God. I mean, I knew there was Jesus. I was based on when I was very young. I knew there was a church. I knew there was a God. I knew there was a Jesus. But I had no idea about having a relationship with God, or understanding, or talking, or speaking, or meditating, or none of that, nothing. So as I learned these things, my mind started to open, my heart started to open, I started to expand. Psychology 101 answers those 3 questions. I'll paraphrase. If this happened to you as a child, you may feel like this. If this happened to you as a child, you may do things like this, and so on and so forth. It answered the questions. I was shocked. I was like, I had no idea there were answers to these questions, right? And that was one thing. Two things came to me. One, I can't believe there are answers to these questions. Wow, I've been asking myself. I wasn't even looking for the answers. I just been asking myself this my whole life. And I opened up this book and they're right here, explaining to me why I do, why I feel, why I act. The second thing that came to me was, if it's in this book, I'm not the only one who has this problem. I'm not the only one who's been asking these questions. I'm not the only one that's been battling. And it just opened a whole nother part of my mind. Talking about like when I was a kid, and it shifted me, from being broken from a loving, kind kid, and it shifted me into another life. This started to shift me again into something else. So I started to study every form of psychology that I could, all the way to Stanford University, psychology, neuroscience. I studied everything, biology, all the sciences of the mind and the body. And I understood. I had all the answers. I had all the answers, but I wasn't healed. There was still something wrong. I met an amazing pastor who saw my brokenness. I believe God showed him my brokenness. And he used to hug me. And he used to say, Raul, keep coming back to church. Learn to quiet your mind and soak in prayer. Learn to quiet your mind and soak in prayer. At the time that he told me that, I had no idea. I had zero control over my mind. Whatever thoughts popped in, I just took and ran with. And most of the time, they're negative. Most of the time, they're concerned, they're worried, they're anxiety, something that happened in the past is depression. Past is depression, future is anxiety. You've always heard the power of now. Live right now. Live this second, right now. We're all sitting here right now talking, looking at each other, listening. Everything's wonderful, right? Do I got things to do tomorrow? Yes. Do I got things to do later today? Yes. Do I have this? Do I have that? Yesterday, what happened? Yeah, of course. But if we're living right now, then we're okay. Everything's happy. We can be happy. Learn to quiet your mind, soak in prayer. Here's what I learned. That I could quiet my mind, that I could control my thoughts. It took me a while. I had to practice. I had to practice everything that I am today. Because I was conditioned. I allowed myself to be conditioned from being broken at the age of 7 all the way through prison. The people that I hung around, the things that I said, the things that I did, being cool and saying this term and that term. We practice that stuff, right? There's a language, right? How do I explain it? A culturally, a sub-language, whatever you want to call it, in gangs, in college, in prison, whatever you're at, people have their own vocabulary, right? They speak a certain way, they use certain words. And when anything that you're getting into, you're learning. Somebody's teaching you from somewhere. You're watching, you're emulating, right? We learned everything that we know, do, think. Everything. So I started practicing being a new person. Saying things, being nice. Hi, how are you? I started practicing being this new person. Trying to become other than who I was, because I knew there was more. Quiet my mind, practiced. Learn to soak in prayer. To me, that means meditation. Quieting and soaking. I always tell people, in my view, my opinion, my experience, when we're praying, we're talking to God. When we're meditating, we're listening. Because if you don't quiet your mind, it's very difficult to hear from God, because our mind does this all the time, nonstop. I have a morning and a night routine. My morning routine is I wake up about 5:30, and then I meditate. I put headphones on and I meditate to certain types of music, and I meditate, and I literally will choose my thoughts. And hopefully you've heard this all the time, that you try it because it works. Gratitude. I go into gratitude. For each person, I name each of my kids and I send them light and I love. I name, and I picture where they're at, where they live, in their bedroom. I picture them and I send them love. I send them love. I picture them. I say their names, my grandkids. I just send love and I'm grateful for them. I literally choose to give gratitude and think about the people that I love. That's how you wake up. You have a wonderful day. When I go to sleep, I do the same thing. Because guess what? I mean, I'm a single guy. I live by myself. I have a 3-story townhome. I live by myself. So it's quiet. So my mind is easy to run when I'm not busy, when I'm not working, when I'm not doing something. I'm by myself and my mind just runs. So when I go to sleep, I do the exact same thing. I lay down, I put on some headphones, put on some music, some kind of drums or something, and I'll start to choose my thoughts, and I'll start to be grateful for the day, and I'll pray, and I'll soak, and I'll meditate. So that for me helps me start my day and helps me sleep well, right? I'll tell you something that I noticed. Here's a little bit of teaching as we get into this. But when I was younger, I used to watch gangster movies. I still do like gangster movies. I gotta admit it. I like the old mobster movies and all, I like the Scarfaces and stuff like that. I've just always been into those type of movies. But what I learned is if I watch that type of thing right before I go to sleep, that's what I dream about. I dream about killing and blood and drugs and all of this stuff. And that's not a good sleep, right? And that's when I started to realize like what we listen to, what we allow to soak in is who we become and what we are. I stopped watching the news 10 years ago. I have not had cable in 10 years plus probably, right? I have Netflix, I have Prime, I pick what I want to watch and I do not watch the news. The way that I know when something major is happening is I'll see it on social media somewhere and then I'll research it to find it myself, not the news channels that are just trying to hammer you and, condition your mind to think and act things like you want you to do. So I choose what I listen to. I choose what goes into my mind because what we think about is who we are. Good, bad, or ugly. Good, bad, or ugly. What we think about is who we are. You remember the people, and I don't want to get into like a politics things, but people who focus, I don't care what side you're on or whatever it is, but when they focus on whatever side they're on, they hate everybody else. That's conditioning. They're conditioned because they're watching the news, right? Some people are watching one news channel that's pro whatever they're pro, and the other people are watching a news channel that's pro whatever they're pro, and they both think they're superior because those same channels are telling them bad things about the other one. That's all they consume. That's all they consume. So it's all they know. It's all they know. So when they look at each other, they go, "You're wrong. No, you're wrong." And yeah. And then all of this hate and all this stuff comes out. Psychological conditioning, that's all it is. It's basic conditioning. The media is basic conditioning, but they're really damn good at it. They're really good at it, and they get people games, music. Man, I have a 16-year-old, and I've been talking to him every week about because I'm listening to the music. I hear the music. I go, son, what is this? Like, what do you hear? What they're telling you? And he has it in his ear with his ear pod or all these things. And it's just pounding. And I told him, I tell him all the time what I just said right now. What you listen to, what you feed into your mind is who you're going to become. Pay attention to it. So when we're lost and we're in darkness and we're in depression, we're in anxiety, and we don't know that we can control our mind, we don't pay attention to who we're hanging around. We don't pay attention to what we're watching, listening to. We don't realize the way we are is conditioned by what our environment is, right? So we have to pay attention. This is a tool for you. We have to pay attention to the things we allow to come into our minds, the people that we hang around, right? The types of things that we do, the types of books that we read, and so on and so forth. I mentioned earlier about significance, that I found my source of significance when I was young and when thought I was cool and people thought I was cool. Raul, my name is Raul. Raul, he'll fight anybody. He has all the girls. Because sadly, this is a sad thing in the gang world per se. The young lost world, young kids, is girls like bad boys. Girls like bad boys culturally when I'm growing up, and I know to this day I see it. So I was the tough young bad boy, so all the girls like me. So what did I do? I got significance. The girls like me. I'm tough. Everybody thinks I'm cool. Blah blah blah. That's where my source of significance was. So I would continue to be that person because that was the only way I felt any type of pride or good. And somebody would be like, "Oh, he's cool," right? Lost, confused. I bring up significance again because one of the things that I work with people on, I utilize Tony Robbins. You guys know who Tony Robbins is? Tony Robbins has what's called the 6 human needs. And I learned this many years ago. I went through some of his courses for coaching and stuff years ago. But the 6 human needs, they're psychological needs, right? They're not like food and water. Oh, yes, there's a thing that says needs that too. It's not wants, it's psychological needs. And I'm just going to read these off to you real quick. These are important. I'm saying these things for a reason, okay? These are the 6 human needs. Certainty. We need certainty in our lives. Assurance you can avoid pain and gain pleasure, safety, and security. We all need that. It's a psychological need. We need to feel safe. We need to be secure. We want to avoid pain, right? And we want to gain pleasure. And we want to be certain, some form of certainty around that. What can create certainty around those types of things, right? Is the question. And then there's uncertainty. There's uncertainty is a need, variety. Otherwise, if we do the same single thing every day, we're bored. And that happens to a lot of people. right? They become zombies. They get up in the morning, they drink their coffee, they drive to work, they do their job, they drive home, they eat their dinner, they go to sleep. I mean, that's just, there's no variety in it. There's no uncertainty in it. So then it becomes bored, and that can create depressions and all kinds of things too. So the need for the unknown, things to change, new stimuli, adventure, right? So there's certainty. We do need a certain amount of certainty in our lives, but then we also need some variety. Significance. Okay, I mentioned significance already. Feeling unique, of value, important, special or needed, independent, significance. All of these things that I'm mentioning to you right now, we can get, receive, and fulfill these needs, good or bad. Bad, there are negative ways to fill these needs. I'll give you an example with significance, is one of the good ones that I've heard, is being in the hood, right? Being a young gangster, right? Being abandoned by my father, not seeing my father. My mother, I loved to death, but she was a single mom raising 3 kids, right? She was at work all of the time. So we were always at home by ourselves and this and that and this. We were just lost, wild, and crazy, right? So how did I get my significance? How can I get significance? Well, I had mentioned that being in these gangs and people looking up to me, respecting me for fighting, would give me this source of significance, right? It would give me that feeling of value. He's unique. He's this, he's that, right? I heard a story one time based on significance where this guy, a young guy, came up and he put a gun up to somebody, right? And when he put that gun up to them, he fulfilled most of these needs by pointing a gun at somebody, right? He was certain they were going to listen to what he had to say because he had that gun in their face, right? There was uncertainty because what's going to happen next, right? Am I going to get in trouble? I mean, there's just this, it's adventure stimuli, right? It's negative, but so I'm explaining that we can fulfill these needs in negative ways. And then his source of significance, he was the most important person to that person that he was pointing that gun in their life at that point, right? So we can fill these needs the wrong way if we don't realize that psychologically we have these needs. Something to study, something to understand. The next one is connection, love, a strong feeling of closeness or union with someone or something, right? A lot of people say that I have really good friends and I just like being alone. I don't want to be around. I don't want to have a girl. I don't want to have a guy, whatever. I have people that act like they don't want or need anybody. It's a psychological, it's a human need. We need touch. We need love. We need hug. We need communication. We need people in our lives. Growth, an expansion of capacity, capability, or understanding. We should always be growing, right? What's the term? If you're green, you're growing. If you're ripe, you're rotting. We always should be growing. We should always be reading and studying and understanding and trying to pay attention to who we are and why we are. Why are we the way we are? Why those 3 questions that I had? I needed to know. I wanted to know, and I started to seek, and I started to find. I'm 53 years old. I continue to seek and grow all of the time. I never stop. Neither do you. You guys are all here right now. That's good. The last one is contribution, a sense of service or focus on helping, giving and supporting others, right? So the 6 human needs are certainty, uncertainty, significance, connection and love, growth, contribution. Those are psychological needs that we have. Now, I have this test that I do with some of my clients. It's not a test. It's like you fill out these forms and it tells you, it tells you in what order are we filling these needs, okay? Because those are the needs, but depending on the order of importance to us at this specific time does tell you who you are and how your life is running, okay? When I did this the first time, I think I did it the first time back in 2012, I thought my love and connection, my contributions were going to be at the top because I'm giving, I'm loving, I care, I'm life coaching, I love people, I want to help them, I want to serve them, all this kind of stuff. That's what I thought was going to come to the top. When I did mine, the top strongest source of these needs that I was feeling was through significance. It should not be the top, because if the top source is significance, then you're always seeking, you're looking for something, you want somebody to give you that unique feeling, that value, that importance, that to feel needed. You're trying to get that, right? Through what you're doing, right? I thought I was helping, serving, and loving, which I was, but looking at it, right? Just being truthful and looking at it at that time, I was doing it to get significance. So I was selfishly giving. I was selfishly giving because I wanted something back, right? So I really had to look at this thing that I went through and study it and read it and understand and start to shift who I was. And that's how we shift. We learn, we take assessments, we do these things, and we learn and we understand them. We go through them, right? And then we can start to realize who we are, why we are. All right. So understanding those 6 human needs are very important. I want to teach you guys something else. When I realized that love equaled pain for me, and when I realized that I allowed people who I loved to treat me badly. Okay, we do things to ourselves, not knowing. We allow people to treat us certain ways. We allow people to stay in our lives that probably shouldn't be. Either they shift, they change the way they treat you, me, or they should be gone, right? Because if somebody's treating you badly and you explain it to them and you ask them not to do that and they continue, you shouldn't be around them. We shouldn't be around them. Now, I never anger. It's not about being angry or hating or anything like that, because everybody has their own stuff. Everybody has their own issues. Everybody's order of significance is different. Everybody has their own baggage. Everybody has their own darkness that they grew up with, right? And I'll go into blueprint in a little bit, and then that'll help understand that. But first, let me tell you about, I'm going to write down blueprint so I don't forget. Let me tell you when I figured out how I allowed people who love me to treat me badly without even knowing it, okay? And it goes back to what I told you about my father, when he would leave me outside the bars and do things like that around me, be drunk and drugs and all this kind of crazy stuff around me. All I knew is that I wanted my father. I loved him regardless. I wanted to be around him. So no matter what he did, I would ignore it. No matter how often he left me outside a bar, no matter how often I saw him fighting and screaming and whatever his wild and crazy life was doing, I wanted to be around him. I loved him. So I allowed him to treat me badly because I loved him and I wanted to be around him. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to let him treat me badly because I love him. It was what happened. It was what was created psychologically, an association in my heart, excuse me, in my mind. Without knowing that that was something that psychologically I accepted or received or understood, to be around somebody I love, it's okay that they treat me badly. So that drug into my relationships, my friendships with my son, my oldest son. It went through into my life. I had no idea that that was happening, that I was allowing people to treat me bad because I love them. I almost would just ignore it. Like things would happen. I'd be like, man, that's messed up. But I would just ignore it. Instead of going like, hey, that's not okay. Hey, that's not okay. You shouldn't treat me like that. You shouldn't do things like that. You know, there's reasons that we accept what we accept from people. Okay. That was mine with love. I allowed people to treat me badly because I thought if I love them, it's okay. Understand these things. Look at them for yourself. Okay. Blueprint. I never blame anybody for who they are. Everybody has something. You ever met people and they go, it's just the way I am. They're angry all the time. It's just the way I am. Or they're cold and to the point or whatever. It's just the way I am. It's the way they are because of something that's happened to them, but it doesn't have to be who they are all the time. The big exercises that I do at my events is I'll have everybody get a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll say, draw a blueprint, like a house, a building, whatever it is, a schematic of something. Just draw anything. I don't care what it is. You can draw a square with a roof on it, but draw your idea of a house. Draw a blueprint. And everybody will stand there. I'll give them about 2 minutes, and they'll draw out a blueprint. And I'll say, now everybody hold it up. And everybody will hold up their blueprint. I'll say, show each other. Everybody will show each other like this. And I'll say, is there one blueprint exactly the same?
That's good.
And they say no, because it never is. And I said, that's also with who you are. You have a blueprint based on every second of your life. Everything you've been told, everything you've been taught, everything that you've experienced, you have a blueprint. All of our, when we're not understanding that we have control, all of our actions, reactions are based on something we've taught, learned, experienced. It's based on something that's happened to us, something we've seen, right? You know, the basics of psychological conditioning. There's all kinds of examples. Some of them, like when I was in college, they were doing like, show me an example of psychological conditioning. So what happened, one of the guy's experiments was his friend was like on the other side of the room and he would clap and then he would throw a ball at him. Boom, you know, and he hit him in the back and said, hey man, what are you doing? And he'd clap and then he'd throw a ball at him. He'd clap and then he'd throw a ball at him. After about 4 times, the guy was like this. As soon as he would clap, the guy was like blocking himself. That's psychological conditioning. He'd hear a clap, and when he heard the clap, the next thing he knew or thought was going to come was the ball hitting him in the head, right? That's a quick, easy example of psychological conditioning. Now, when you're growing up, if you're in a lifestyle of or family who tells you, put you down all the time, that's who you think you are. If your parents and or friends or whatever it is tell you you're no good, you're no good, you're no good, that's what you'll think psychologically. That's how you'll feel about yourself. That's why people walk around with their heads down. That's why people don't want to, talk, or that's why people are not social. Or that's why people are social, the opposite, right? There's different things happen to us for different reasons. We can be psychologically conditioned, good, bad, and ugly. So the blueprint. Everybody has a different blueprint based on the way they were raised, based on their experiences. The problem is in society, we're all walking around with this blueprint, right? My core beliefs, my conditioning, everything that happened to me, all my good, all my bad, my ugly. This is how life should be. This is me, right? Walking around, this is my life, this is what I believe. And then I go meet somebody else, and their blueprint is completely different. And they say ABC. And I go, no, that's wrong. It's CBA. They're like, no, what are you talking about? It's CBA. Oh, and then people will start to fight. If you understand they have a different blueprint, regardless of the subject matter, then there's no way to be angry with them. It's what they know. It's what they believe. It's in their core. You can't argue with somebody that believes 2 + 2 is 3, and they believe it in their heart. you won't be able to shift it, right? There's huge debates, like I talk about politically. There's huge debates I'm seeing right now all over the place. The world is flat, the world is round. Now somebody's starting to say it's square. I'm just like, oh my God, what's happening around here? And I could care less what anybody thinks, right? But they fight for it. Like, it's flat, and you're an idiot if you don't believe it, and it's flat, and here's why. Here's the other thing. Whatever you believe, whatever you seek, you will find. If you start researching right now that the earth is flat, you will convince yourself that the earth is flat. If you start researching right now that the world is round, you will convince yourself the world is round. It's what we focus on, it's who we are and who we create. It's what we create, okay? So everybody has their own blueprint. And because we're living off our own blueprint, it's easy to argue with other people. But then when you understand that you have a blueprint, then all you can do is go, oh, well, they were raised differently. They think differently. How can I be angry? It's okay. I don't agree, but I'm not going to be mad at you and try and force you to think like me, to live off of my blueprint. It's impossible for you to live off of my blueprint. We could talk and we could have some things in common. Yeah, and we can understand. And we can be friends. Oh, yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, good. Oh, I don't agree with that one. Okay, no problem. And then you just keep going, right? These tips and these tools, the human needs, the understanding why that we allow people to treat us a certain way we do, understanding blueprints. If I had known these things growing up, I wouldn't have been through juvenile hall. I wouldn't have been on the streets. I wouldn't have been taken from my mother. I wouldn't have ended up in prison. These are important tips and tools that the average person has no idea. They don't get it. They don't understand. I'm going to give you another example of a blueprint. When early on, when I met my wife, she, a few times, this was one incident it was about a 3-week period. I would get up in the morning and she would be really angry at me. And I'd wake up and I'd be like, why is she angry? I just woke up. I didn't do anything. Like, what's the problem? Right? Like, I don't get it. But I noticed like a few days in a row. So I just asked her one day, I said, hey, I notice you're mad at me every morning. Like, what is happening? Like, I don't get it. And she looked at me and she said, why don't you get up in the morning before me and the kids and turn on the heater so the house is warm? That's what she said. And I looked at her and I was smart enough. And I'll tell you, at this time, I'm barely learning a lot of this stuff that I'm teaching you. I didn't even know a lot of this stuff. I look back, right? Looking back, we connect the dots. Now looking forward. So looking back, I learned that this was a form of understanding our blueprints. And I was smart enough not to say, like, why don't you? Like, I don't understand. Like, what's up? Here's the blueprint. My wife was raised with two sisters, three siblings, and by a single dad. Her dad got up every morning and turned on that heater and made the house warm for them. I was raised with a single mother, me and two siblings, three of us. My mother got up every morning and turned on that heater and warmed the house for the kids. My blueprint says the mom does it. Her blueprint says the dad does it. None of them are wrong. None of them are wrong. It's just the blueprints that we had. So I was happy to go, okay, I'll do it. It's not like I'm going to fight over it and say the woman should do it. It was just what I was conditioned to believe. The woman does that, right? So there's another example of how we can get crossed with people. And sadly, because there's so much brokenness, because there's so much baggage that we have from our youth, from our ex-marriages, from whatever they are, relationships, too many people aren't willing to look at themselves, right? I could have started to argue with her and said, you do it, right? And not even knowing why. I think the woman should do that. And we could have fought and we could have argued about it. And in my core, I felt like the woman should do that. In her core, she felt like the man should do that. And honestly, when it comes down to it, if you could just be at peace and understand it, and your spouse is asking you to do something as simple as that, then just freaking do it, right? It's not that hard. But a lot of people will argue the point because their blueprint says, no, that's not what's happening. Psychological conditioning, blueprints, sources of significance, understanding these things, quieting your mind, soaking it in prayer. These are tools. These are basic tools that we need to understand to be able to get along with our families, with our friends and relationships, and with society, honestly, so that you're not driving down the street flipping people off. You know, I mean, I really do feel bad for these people, and it's all ages, it's all men and women. It's not like one type of person. And I always think when they drive by and they're flipping and they're honking and all this stuff, and I go, you know why I feel so bad for this person? First of all, because I know why they're like that. Right? And there's something going on in their life. But second of all, is they're going to be pissed for an hour driving down that freeway. And I'm just like, sorry, you know, like I'm fine, like sorry. And they're angry for an hour. And I'm just like, sorry, you know. So we do it to ourselves at that point. We're doing it to ourselves, right? If we can choose our thoughts, and we can switch our state just like that, and we can, then why be angry for an hour over somebody we don't even know who we think cut us off or passed us? Some people get pissed off just for passing them. It's really weird. I don't get that. But we're choosing to be the person that we are once we understand some of these things I'm talking about. We're choosing to be the person that we are when we understand these things. So if you don't like the person that you are, then pay attention, shift, practice, become another person. We can become another person, mentally, physically, psychologically. Quiet the mind, soak in prayer. I'm gonna close, and I'll let anybody come up with a couple of questions, but I'm gonna close with the story of my healing. I told you about my father. I told you about how it affected me so much. And looking back, how I even figured out that I had a childhood trauma, how I figured out that age of 7 being taken and confused and not understanding my emotions and so on and so forth, affected me so badly. The healing came with God. The healing came with God, and after I learned to quiet my mind and listen. I told you about a wall that I built. I lived in a fog throughout my life, and I couldn't get past this wall just because I didn't know how. I didn't know what it was. I just really remember a physical wall. I mean, mentally, it was a physical wall. Does that make sense? Mentally, it was physical. Mentally, it was a physical wall that
That's good. I like that.
I could see. And over the years that I did start to learn and grow, the wall did get smaller. At one point, it was a huge, solid brick red wall. I mean, I could see it. And I would hit it all the time. Anytime I wanted to feel good, Anytime I wanted to love, anytime I wanted to allow somebody to love me, I would hit that wall. So over the years, as I started to learn and study, the wall did start to come down, and I was working with I used to see therapists and psychologists and everything. And a psychologist once said, well, what is this wall? And I said, I don't know. I said, I don't know. And she said, can you put a door in the wall and go through it? And I said, I can picture, we're doing this work. And I said, I can picture the wall. I have my eyes closed. I said, I can picture the door, but I can't open it. She said, can you put a ladder, lean a ladder on that wall and walk over it? And I said, I can see the ladder. I said, but I can't climb it. And she asked me, what's on the other side of the wall? And I said, freedom. I sense freedom. And she goes, what do you mean? And I go, I don't know. I said, I can see over it. I see a beautiful miles and miles of fields. I see some green, beautiful trees. And I see like a purple sky, beautiful. But and you asked me, what do I see or feel? And I said, I just, freedom. That's what I see. I sense it. That's what comes to me, freedom. And she honestly didn't, I can't say she didn't help me. She helped me a lot with the work that she did, but she wasn't able to get rid of that wall. And it wasn't until I was soaking in prayer and focusing on God that God put me in that field. Like I'm standing here, so sitting, I'm going to stand, let me raise my desk. Like I'm standing here now, I was standing in that field. And I looked and I was like, wow. And I remember meditating. This is, I've never shared this. I've shared this story, but I've never shared this part. I was meditating in the hot bathtub and I was laying in the bathtub and I had my hands like this. And I just started to do some breath work and meditate. And I left and I appeared in this field, just like I'm here now. And I saw the field and it was just amazing. I was like, oh, the wall is gone. The field is open. And I tried to walk and I couldn't move. And I was like, man, what's happening? The wall is gone and I'm stuck now. And I looked over. Something prompted me to look over. And I saw a little boy there, a little 7-year-old boy. And I realized it was me when I was 7 years old. And I got angry at this little boy. I said, you're my wall. All of these years, all of this pain, all of this suffering, all of this confusion, it's you. And this little boy looked back at me. And he says, I'm not holding you. He says, you're holding me. And this energy of understanding, just this flow of energy, just like a tidal wave hit me of understanding. And I saw my whole life. And it took me all the way back to this boy at 7 years old that was taken from his father who he loved. And it took me back to that day on the playground when I said, I'm never going to cry again. And no one's ever going to laugh at me again. And I realized that my heart hardened that day. My heart hardened. And I created an alter ego. And that alter ego stood in front of this little boy and said, no one's going to laugh at this guy. No one's going to make fun of him. No one's ever going to hurt this boy. And that was the fighter. That was the loss. That was the confused. That was the anger. That was the one fighting for 20-something years, defending this little boy. Nobody's going to hurt this little boy. But the little boy was, let me go. Let's be free. Get rid of the anger. Get rid of the depression. Let's just be free. Let's just be happy. Let's just live. So I knelt down and I started to hug this boy. I was just prompted to kneel down and just hug him. And I started just pouring into him words that were not coming from me. I love you. I'm sorry. You're the light. You're the love. You are joy. You are happiness. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I've held you here. I'm sorry for everything that I've created. I love you and I love you and you are joy and you are happiness. And I was just pouring in this little boy, just hugging him, kneeling on my knees. And then I started to call him son. I love you, son. You're the light, my son. At the same time I'm speaking this to him, I'm saying into myself, this is not my son. This is me, right? So as I'm doing it, I'm getting confused. But then everything shifted. My father, who had passed away so many years before, I felt him hugging me now. As an adult, my father's hugging me. And I'm hugging myself. And my father said, I love you, son. I'm sorry, son. You're the light, you're the joy. But next thing I know, all three of us were standing up. And my father and myself again. And God is speaking to us. This energy is speaking to us. I love you, my son. You are the light. You are joy. You are happiness. You're the light of the world. My father disappeared. And myself as a little boy appeared in my hand for some reason. And I put him into my heart. Something just prompted me, put him into your heart. And I put him into my heart. And I took this deep breath. And that heart that had hardened so many years ago softened. And that was actually the second that I realized that it had even hardened. Because it softened and I felt it. And the little boy ends up right in front of me and he starts walking into the field. And he's walking and I'm looking at him and I'm going, man, he's free, you're free. And he stops, he takes a few steps and he stops. And he turns around and he looks at me like, is this okay? And I was like, why are you stopping? You're free. But I also remembered, that's me. I'm the one who's been holding him all of these years. This identity that I created, this alter ego that I created to protect him, that would fight for him. Do you have that? Do you see that in people? When you don't understand why people do what they do, act the way that they act, or feel the way that they feel, there's an identity, there's an alter ego that's protecting that child inside of them. And I said, you're free. And he walked into the field and he just disappeared. And God spoke to me. He said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take this wisdom. You're going to take the love that you had from your father before you were taken from him. You're going to take the confusion, the anger, the darkness, all of the wisdom that you gained from the streets and in prisons. You're going to take all of the college, all of the psychology and neuroscience and everything you studied, your body, your mind, and now your soul is healed. And you're going to go work with kids. You're going to take this, you're going to go work with kids that are in juvenile hall. And that's the first thing I started to do immediately. I got myself volunteered in juvenile hall, started working with kids. At that point, somebody said, you should write your story in a book. I started writing my book. I started sharing my message wherever I could. Next thing I know, I have an entire company of helping people share their stories. Because when you share your story, you help other people heal. Right now, that is my business. I put people on stage. I help them put their stories together. And, I have events all the time. That's not what this call is about. I did this call because there are people out there that are hurting, that are broken. And right now, there are a lot of people during this season that are suffering and that are battling with depressions and anxieties and anti-socialism and all of these things. I feel it. It happens to me. If I didn't have these tools, it would be a whole nother life for me. I have these tools to be able to practice and put into place. We have to use the tools, right? What I've learned is a lot of this stuff doesn't just go away. We don't allow it to affect us negatively anymore. But we have to have the tool to maintain, right? Like your car. If you know how to work on a car and your car breaks down, you got a tool. You got to use that tool. And you got to use that tool and you got to use the tool to keep your car running, right? It's the same thing. We have these tools, these psychological, these tools that we have to understand the blueprints, the human needs, all of these things I'm talking about. Just even understanding that there is an alter ego. Understanding that there is a childhood trauma. Understanding there is depression and anxieties. Blueprints. These are tools that we use on a daily basis. If somebody makes you angry, instead of getting angry, we can look at them nicely and just think, wow, your blueprint is interesting. It's not nothing like mine. It's not like mine. It's interesting. But what, we can't get angry of it because it's who they are. And we don't know what stage they are. I'm like I said earlier, I'm 53 years old. I still know people from when I was lost and in that darkness that are still in prison, that are still going back and forth. They're my age and older. They're still going back and forth. They haven't figured it out. And that's something I haven't figured out yet. Why was I chosen? right? Why was I chosen to write these books and to change people's lives and to coach people and to help people through these processes? Why was I chosen? And I don't know if it's a matter of being chosen or of a matter of receiving and taking on the burden. I call it a welcome burden. I believe, I know God speaks to each and every person on this earth if you take the time to listen.
Mhm.
Some of us take it and do something with it.
You were
Others
willing, Paul.
are so lost and so broken that we can't stop and we can't take the time. You know how much of a struggle it was for me to go from excuse my language, to go from prison to college? Man, that wasn't an easy thing. I didn't just go, I'm going to go to college one day. Oh yeah, this is easy. Man, it took me 2 years to get my high school equivalency. I didn't know how to do math. I didn't know how to do anything. I went to college. I spent 6 years in college. I got a ton of units. Never got a degree. And I'm not even mad about that because I studied what I wanted to study. I studied what helped me understand me and other people. The stuff I'm teaching you, a lot of it I learned in college, the other half I learned through God. That's why this book, my second launch, Transforming Childhood Trauma with God and Psychology. And a lot of religion that I believe is separation.
Absolutely.
That's a conflict.
Absolutely.
It's a conflict, but it's not. Right? Mind, body, and spirit. We've all heard that. The mind and the body is psychology. What you eat matters. What you put in your body matters. That's a science. What we think about matters. Things that happen to us create neural associations, and it makes us think and act and do things that we do. That's psychology. I learned and I understood why those things were happening, like I said, but it took God to heal it. So that's my message. That's what I want people to understand. And if these tools that I gave you even just planted a seed for you to go learn more, to go study more about the 6 human needs, just maybe do an assessment, right? To maybe find somebody to help you walk you through these processes. I didn't bring you on here to sell you anything. I coach one-on-one. I'm going back to coaching in 2024. 2023, I didn't coach anybody in life coaching, this type of coaching. I took a full year break, but I'm going back to it in 2024 because God is calling me to do it. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. I help a lot of people with their stories. I do a lot of coaching with people putting their stories together because we are talking about their personal stuff. God's calling me back to that. And I'm not, like I said, I didn't come to this call to sell you anything. I wanted to give you some wisdom. I wanted to give you some knowledge. I want to give you something that you can utilize or it'll give you an inspiration to go seek more. Learn more about psychological conditioning if you don't know what it is. Understand blueprint if you don't know what it is. Understand how we get so angry. Understand how emotions are an energy in motion. Emotions are an energy. We have to learn how to express them. Learn the importance of expressing your emotions. Learn the importance of understanding them. That's what this call is about. Okay, I'm gonna answer some questions. We're over an hour now. I'm so happy that you guys all hung out. Who has a question? How can I help you? Yes,
Did you go to Stanford?
I did. Yes.
I drank my way out of Stanford back in the 60s.
Oh, really? Super cool.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and so much for Dr. Hadley. I'm actually taking some Stanford online courses now in the psychology area.
Oh, super cool.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my story there is I had all of these units. None of them were structured, right? But I started to research. So I studied everything I could study at a junior college level, right? And then I wasn't structured to go to any university because I studied what I wanted to study. And back then, the internet, I honestly was just starting. I can't say there wasn't any, but it was just starting. It was dial up, and you click on a page and you come back 5 minutes later and it'd barely be showing up. So there wasn't a matter of being able to study like that. There was no YouTube, there was none of that, smartphones or anything back then. So I just look, I want to study the best. Where is the best psychology? And I found everybody kept saying Stanford has this big hall and blah, blah, blah. I forgot even the name of the hall already. So I went there and I said, hey, I want to go to school here. And I brought my transcripts and everything. By that time in my college career, I knew what all this stuff was. And they looked at him, they said, man, you got plenty of units, but it's not structured. Like you're missing this and you're missing this and you're missing that, which to me is stuff like, I don't even care about that stuff, but you have to have a structure to transfer correctly. So here's what they told me is they said, you do have enough credits, because if you have a certain amount of credits, units, they said, you do have enough credits where you can take continuing study courses here. You can't get the degree because you haven't done what you're supposed to do. So, they said, but you got to pay for them out of your pocket. So I physically went and I would take classes there at the university. It was amazing. Great stuff. That's my story.
Considering studies on online right now.
Super cool. Right on. One of the professors that stood out most to me was Dr. McConnelly, I think was her name. Is she still around? Have you seen her?
I
No? All right. She did a psychology course on happiness, which was really cool. I mean, there's so many different types of psychology that are out there. Any questions in regard to some of the stuff that I spoke about?
It was excellent.
I don't
Excellent.
have questions
Excellent.
per se. Oh,
Mhm.
go ahead, Don.
I'm just acknowledging it was an excellent presentation, Roland.
Oh, yeah.
Some point in time, have a one-on-one with you and we'll
Yeah.
discuss the future, because I'm what you're talking about is exactly what I'm called to do.
Oh, good. Let's do it. Let's do that. I forgot, where are you located?
Orange County.
Orange County, then we're coming to Los Angeles in February, right? We're always down that way. And we're also planning another yacht program that we're gonna do in Newport Beach coming up this year. So yeah, we're gonna meet for sure, my friend.
I was in the hospital in November when you did that one.
Okay. Right now, we're gonna plan, I think, Los Angeles is in February, and then Daniel will be there. He's gonna speak, and then from there, June, so February, March, April, May, June, and we're at the end of February, March, April, May. So somewhere around June, what we're gonna do is a mastermind style. Another buddy of mine has a huge yacht. I think it has 8 bedrooms in it. We usually use a smaller one that has 3 bedrooms. We're gonna do this one that has 3 stories, 8 bedrooms, beautiful yacht. And it's going to be almost a mastermind more this time, where there's going to be about 40 people max can fit on there. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be great. So from Los Angeles, then we're going to hit that one up in June. So it'll be good. So I'm sure we'll
Nice.
and we'll talk before that. Okay. Anybody else have questions?
No, I just wanted to, share, you sharing your story with me, over this past year. So it's been a year since you and I connected.
Oh, wow. Super cool, man.
Yeah. And, your story has helped me go through my story, and, because I didn't think I had a story, I didn't quote unquote have the trauma. I mean, my mother, when I did my Dallas talk, that's the first time I spoke about, my mother abandoned me and my 3 siblings.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever really publicly spoke about that. And then just a couple of weeks ago, my sister, Becky, called me up and was sharing with me, well, she's discovered that we thought that she and I both had the same parents, but she's discovered that the father that we both thought we shared is not her father. And
wow.
yeah, so and I was just talking with my son today that, there's a reason that Becky and I didn't find out about that until till now. I'm 55, she's 54. So
Yeah.
for some reason, God hid that information from us until now, because we were ready for it. So, yeah, and I went through and I did the edits on my Dallas talk and sent it back to you. So,
Yeah.
I put more in there, or, fleshed it out a little bit more. And as I was reading it and, proofing it to send it back, I'm just like, wow, there is more here than I really ever realized.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah. You know what? It's interesting because I don't read my own books that often, but rewriting the new version of it, I did read my original. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, there's a lot, man. There's a lot of stuff that we put out there, that's really, I mean, I always say it's the G in tag, transparency, acceptance, and growth. The growth is for both sides. It really is. When we're sharing our own stuff, we're growing also,
Exactly.
and we're learning. So it's reading my own book, I thought the same thing. There's been a lot. I mean, just the first chapter in the first book, it's like when I start to read it, I forget and I go, wow, and I start to cry. It's crazy.
And did I share my other story with you? It's kind of a fiction story, fiction, but it's based on what I went through. I titled it The Judgment.
I think you did. Yeah, I think you did share with me a while back, right? Earlier in the year, you sent that over.
Yeah. I think mid-year or something.
Yeah.
After the May event down in wherever we were in May. I forget where we were in May.
I know, me too.
But yeah, so I went back and I reread that again, and I was like, holy cow, there's, I mean, and I wrote that over almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And, and I'm like, wow, the insight that I had then that I didn't realize that I had.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, yeah.
That's the power in getting our story out there. There's so much healing that comes from it within us, right? Because like we don't realize what we're carrying, and it's very common with the one-on-one work that I do, whether it be in coaching, life coaching, or speaker coaching, is that when I get people's stories out of them, they start to go, I forgot about that. Oh, and I remember this. Oh, gee. And then they start to look at the significance of the things that actually happened and blueprint and all these things that I'm talking about, and they start to connect things, and it's just that's what I love. That's my calling, right? Is like boom, all these connections. Ooh, I got another call at 2:30. Any last questions? Sorry, any last questions or concerns? And you guys all have my email, and I know most of you guys have my phone number. So reach out, Don. I'd love to meet you, my friend. I go down that way quite a bit. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to be able to help you put a program together and start coaching people, introduce you to our people. What it would take is just really getting to work together a little bit and understanding your story, right? Understanding your story and your wisdom and all the things that you have, all the things that you've learned that you want to pass on. And I know we're going to, because you jump on. So I know God is pulling on you like, hey man, you found the guy, here's the guy, here's the guy, right? He's telling you that. So,
Yeah.
it's not a coincidence that I'm always in your area either. So, let's make it happen, Don. All right.
Still live in San Jose?
No, I'm in Sacramento area now.
Okay.
Little town called Rockland. Yeah.
I know where Rockland is.
Okay, yeah. All right, my friends. Love and blessings.
God
Thank you for
bless.
hanging out. Hey, I'm
God
gonna
bless you guys.
send you guys this recording on YouTube. If you know somebody who needs it that didn't want to show up today, send it to them, okay? Love and blessings, guys. Bye-bye.
Now.
No.